But first up, very seriously, Labor has betrayed Israel again this week with that vote at the UN calling for an immediate and unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Who can believe what Penny Wong is doing to our country, as well as defending the work of UNRWA, who, that's the aid agency that was known to employ people who were Hamas terrorists. Anthony Albanese's leadership, as we know, is under scrutiny over his handling or mishandling or non-handling of anti-Semitic attacks, those that we saw in Melbourne and Sydney. For more, I'm joined by Executive Council of Australian Jewry co-CEO Alex Ryvchin. Alex, it's been a dreadful week. It seems like it's been much longer than just 1 week since that firebombing of the synagogue. How's the community holding up?
Look, they're holding up well, all in all. And I feel like, since the firebombing and since what happened in Woollahra, and really for the last 14 months, the community has been cycling through a range of emotions, grief and trauma, pain, disbelief, but also anger. And after the Addas synagogue fire, that was the real emotion that I was detecting in the community. There was a great sense of anger, a sense of betrayal, a feeling that the federal government had allowed this to occur through its inaction, through its weakness, had basically created a situation in which a synagogue could be set alight. It's something that hasn't happened anywhere in the world. We've had increasing anti-Semitism in the United States, in Europe, but only in our country do we see a burning synagogue. It's a scandal. And the fact that the federal government has presided over the greatest increase in anti-Semitism in this country's history, I think is a cause for shame and a cause, at the very least, for deep reflection on the part of the government. I'm not sure that'll happen. And as you say, they seem to be doubling down on their policies with regards to Israel, demonizing it, insulting it at every opportunity. And I think they don't realize the connection between the Jewish community and the Jewish state. And they don't realize that when they treat Israel as a pariah, as a rogue state, it impacts on how our fellow Australians treat this community. So I think they need to come to that realization quickly.
I've been around a long time, and I can remember the regard that Prime Ministers like Bob Hawke, for example, had with his connection with the Australian Jewish community. He had a very strong, long-lasting connection to Australian Jews. He'd be turning in his grave, wouldn't he?
Well, we feel like we're at a low point in terms of relations with the government. And you're right, we are an Australian community. We've had extensive relations with governments, left and right, Liberal and Labor. The community, a lot of people don't realize this, goes back to the First Fleet. We helped build this country. We feel like we're part of this country. We love this country. We're patriotic to this country. We serve in the military. We've contributed to every facet of Australian life and will continue to do so. But the way that we've been treated in the last 14 months, when we've needed the government most, has really let the community down. And it's made us feel like we're alone. But fortunately, civil society and other communities are filling that vacuum of leadership. And we're hearing from other faiths and other cultural and national groups all the time. And ordinary Australians, I receive messages, hundreds of messages every week, pledging support for the Jewish community. People are astonished at what's happening to us. And so that makes us feel like, we're not alone in this fight, and that's very important.
Well, the targeting is now, there's no argument about the targeting. I mean, if you're setting cars alight and daubing anti-Israel slogans in Woollahra, you're in an area where there is a large Jewish population. When you're attacking a synagogue in Melbourne, in the heart of the Jewish community of this city, you're targeting Jews, and it is an anti-Semitic attack. I mean, can we put the genie back in the bottle? How can the government regain the trust of the Jewish community and prevent this from still happening? I mean, I tell you what, tomorrow, Saturday, there'll be another pro-Palestinian march right through the middle of Melbourne, people waving, Hamas flags. It hasn't stopped, Alex.
That's right. And to answer your question about what can the government do, the answer is stop talking and start doing. We're well beyond the point of words and rhetoric and pretty speeches that are meant to appease the Jewish community. We want to see action. And after the Addas fire, we basically put a letter to the Prime Minister with all the things we've been calling for the last 14 months, asking him to urgently act on these things for the good of the community, and not just the community. When cars are burning in our neighborhoods, it's not just the Jewish community that suffers. When a synagogue is set alight, it's not merely an attack on the Jewish community, it's an attack on free worship, multiculturalism, Western values, our very freedoms and democracy in the society. That's what's at stake here. But the government hasn't woken up to that. and we need them to. And we, for a long time, have been calling for increased security funding, given the threats that we're receiving. And it took the Addas fire to finally get that additional security funding. We've been calling for greater education about what anti-Semitism is, so people stop being manipulated by anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jewish global domination and Jewish money and Jewish bloodthirstiness and Jewish evil that corrode and degrade healthy societies. We've been calling for a ban on protests outside schools and places of worship. That should not be happening. And there's a direct connection between those protests and the firebombing of synagogues. It assigns them as legitimate targets, and then you see what happens later on. So we've been calling for concrete action, law reform, for people who hold aloft the portraits of terrorist leaders to be brought to justice. That hasn't happened. We need better policing, but none of these things are happening at the moment, frankly. But it begins with rhetoric at least and leadership. But even on that, the government has been sloppy and weak and contradictory.
Alex, you're doing an outstanding job for your community. Thank you very much for giving us some time. Alex Ryvchin there, and we'll keep an eye on that in the coming weeks.